What's hot at E3 2019?
Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by NetComm, taking Australian technology to the global market.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and this week I'm not joined by Adam Turner. He's off planning revenge against me after I beat his Galaga in 1942 high scores. Not that I'm counting, you understand. But it's a gaming week with the E3 conference being held in Los Angeles, and that means it's time to cross over live to Los Angeles, where, as long as the Vertical Hold satellite's battery keeps chugging along, I should be being joined by technology editor for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, Tim Biggs. Tim, can you hear me?
I can. I can hear you loud and clear. Thanks for having me.
So, gaming absolutely is the news this week, and there's a fair old whack of it to get through, and we could spend hours, but in the spirit of going behind the headlines, we'll deep dive into just a few key bits of gaming news. And one of the big themes this year for E3 seems to have been game streaming, which as a technology has been around for a few years, but it's really come to the forefront this year. What's happening, Tim?
Yeah, so I mean, before E3 even started, before the pre-E3 even started, Google sort of slipped itself in and had a big old coming out party for its Stadia service, which is, it's completely streaming. There's no computer or console you have to buy. There's no cartridges or discs. You just sign up to the service, and then you need to have a screen that's connected to the internet, like a Google phone or a TV with a Chromecast plugged into it, and then you just press a button and your games, appear as though by magic. And when I say magic, obviously I mean a Google server somewhere has a very powerful computer in it that plays the games and sends the stuff to you. So yeah.
I'm sure Google would love for you to think of it as magic. And it's also using, though, an internet connected game controller, though, which to me seems like a really weird idea. The idea that my game controller specifically has its own internet connection.
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't have to. If I'm running Stadia on a laptop, for example, I can take my Xbox or PS4 controller and just plug it in by USB, and it'll work like normal. The issue with that is that my inputs are going to the computer and then being uploaded to the cloud, whereas the Stadia controller has a direct connection from me to the Google server. So it supposedly will cut down on latency because it's removing that step where it goes through my machine.
So, have you had the opportunity to actually give Stadia a run? Because we're not seeing it in Australia this year for certain, and possibly not for some time. But presumably they're showing it off at E3. They're trying to get people hyped.
I personally have not seen it. I know it is at E3 behind closed doors. Google doesn't have a presence on the show floor at E3. I've spoken to American journalists who have had their hands on it, but I'm assuming because I'm an Australian journalist, they didn't pick up the phone and get in touch with me about that one. But I did, by way of segue, get hands on with Xbox's solution, Project X Cloud.
So this is one that's really interesting to me, especially because Microsoft has servers in Australia. There is the prospect actually that we might see this in Australia, in fact, before Stadia. Talk me through what their proposition, what their vision of game streaming is.
Sure. Well, they announced this time last year, that they were getting into game streaming. And this year, I think they kind of confused the matter a little bit. But after talking with them about it, I think I grasp what's going on. So there are two separate products here. One of them is that your Xbox at home will be able to connect to the internet in such a way that when I'm out and about on the train at work, I'll be able to pick up my phone, press a button, my Xbox at home will turn on, and I'll be able to play it remotely like that. And that's something that's been around for a while. PlayStation's done that with varying degrees of success. This apparently is a newly engineered way to do it, and it's totally free. It's just going to be part of Xbox. But the new stuff that they are announcing is the xCloud will be basically virtual Xbox One consoles at Microsoft Azure data centers, where I can pick up my phone or my tablet or whatever, connect to a data center, and then play that way. And the advantage there being I don't have to rely on my home's awful upload speed to get that game to me because it's an Azure server and I'm going to be on 4G probably. Um, the potential is there for it to work seamlessly, and because it's Microsoft, all my games, all my saves, data, and stuff like that is already in those servers. So I should be able to get access to my stuff that I already own or stuff that I get through Xbox Game Pass through the cloud.
So you say the potential is there, you've gone hands on with it. Does the potential meet the reality in a way that's pleasing as a gamer?
Well, I mean, the first thing we need to have as a caveat is that I did go hands on, but it was in a very controlled environment as far as these things go. I was in the Los Angeles Convention Center with a new Samsung phone, cables plugged into it. I assume some sort of Ethernet. I'm not 100% sure. And the server is in San Francisco, so not right next door, but not terribly far away, and it did work very well. There was noticeable latency, which you would expect. It was no worse than playing on a TV with the game mode turned off, and the fidelity was great. It was in HD. It was running at near enough to 60 frames a second, with just a little bit of latency. So it was impressive in that test environment.
Okay, and Microsoft, though, is having a bit of a bet both ways because it also announced or started to announce its next generation Xbox, an actual physical thing that you would have in your home. Tell me about Project Scarlet.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say. They sort of just teased it a little bit, but yes, it is a brand new platform. It's got all the great new specs. It's got a new custom AMD processor that's several times more powerful than the last one. It's using solid state drives, which should help eliminate loading screens and allow for all sorts of new tricks and nicer graphics. But this is certainly a box that's being created with things like cloud streaming in mind, and with things like the new subscription services that Microsoft is rolling out in mind. I think it's part of a strategy, as they said, to allow you to play your Xbox games on any device you want and wherever you want and with whoever you want. So I see xCloud as being sort of an intrinsic part of that platform because the way they're hoping you'll use it is you'll get home, you'll play your games in glorious 4K, and then when you're out of the house, instead of loading up a phone game, you will just continue to play the same games, and presumably it'll work better with Scarlet than it will on the hardware we already have.
And the other thing I find interesting there, though, is it's going to still have an optical drive, even though they have an Xbox variant which doesn't. So they're kind of they're reaching back in technology terms at the same time they're reaching forward in a way.
Like I mean, they're saying it's going to be compatible with 4 generations of software, which means if you've got a catalog of Xbox One, Xbox 360's original Xbox games, you're going to want to put them in the machine. And also, I just don't think they're ready yet to sever ties completely with the retailers. They still rely on to get their hardware out there. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was a variant of Scarlet that didn't have a disk drive, or if a couple of years into the thing they said, here's the redesign. It's slimmer, it's nicer, and there's no optical drive. But for that launch, when you want to get hardware into people's hands, I think they need that retailer relationship.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I suppose this is all gearing up for E3 2020 when we presumably will see Scarlet versus PlayStation 5. Not that we saw an awful lot of Sony at this E3.
No, they are gone entirely. It's sort of every year it seems like there's someone who's backing out of E3. Activision no longer has a presence on the floor. EA moved its stuff down to down to Hollywood to EA Play the weekend before E3. Microsoft's off the show floor as well. They have all their stuff in a separate box across the road. But Sony this year didn't do any of that. They just said, no, we're not going. And I think a lot of the reason is that we're in this weird period where we know all the games that are left for this generation of consoles. And, for Sony, it's stuff like Death Stranding, Ghost of Tsushima, and Last of Us Part 2. We know basically what Xbox has for the rest of the generation as well. They don't want to announce games that are coming to the next generation because we haven't heard about the next generation yet. So we're just sort of in this holding pattern. And if you watch Microsoft's E3 conference, I think you could feel a bit of that. There was a lot of sort of talking around the next generation, not a lot of big new exclusive games, even though they have all those studios working on them now. And I think Sony was just a bit worried that they would look a bit foolish if they went out there for 2 hours and talked about the same three games. So yeah, you're right. I think next year Sony will come back and it'll be two brand new consoles, two brand new launch window titles, and yeah, it'll be on.
I think it'll be really interesting to see as well, because that transition period is always a slightly awkward one. And Microsoft has bodged this before, especially when it jumped from the original Xbox to the 360 by cutting off the people who just bought, their at that time current console. But what we're seeing in terms of games already is pretty impressive. And I suppose I shouldn't ignore the fact you're in LA, home of Hollywood, and things kind of kicked off with what I could call the Keanu moment.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. He. It was the biggest reaction of the conference by far, which is kind of damning, I suppose, because it was for a Hollywood actor and not a game, and it was for a game that is coming to every console and not just the Xbox.
It's a weird one. So for people who don't know, we're talking about Cyberpunk 2077, which is already a hugely anticipated game. In fact, I think we've talked about it with you at E3 before because it's been coming for a while. And I mean, the digital representation's pretty spot on, but I was just left wondering, is that a game that actually needs Keanu Reeves?
It's very strange, and having seen a good chunk of Cyberpunk now, the way he's implemented in the game is quite weird as well. He's basically a digital ghost. So like your player has this chip inserted in their head, and then suddenly they start seeing Keanu Reeves everywhere, and it's one of those things where you can see him, no one else can see him. There's a one-way conversation kind of going. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if at some point in the development they just inserted him into the game. Like I believe it's Keanu doing all the performance capture and certainly all the voice, but it doesn't seem like he's baked in. It seems like he's at some point they've had a conversation, they've worked out they could possibly get Keanu Reeves in the game, and they've just sort of whacked him in there. But yeah, I mean it's a good selling point.
So what you're telling me is that Neo has become Morpheus?
Yes, yes.
Um, I suppose what else in the Xbox lineup for the current machine engaged you from that presentation?
Well, I mean, Gears 5, when I saw it last year, I was very excited for it. I love Gears of War, and this game seems like it's going in a very emotional direction, which isn't unusual for the series, but it is unusual that they're leaning on it so heavily in the marketing. This year, however, at the conference, there was sort of like 2 minutes of just Cat's face and no details of the game. It was a very strange showing. They did talk about multiplayer stuff, which I personally couldn't care less about. But so that was a bit disappointing. They also had a Lego expansion for Forza Horizon 4, and I can always do with more Forza Horizon 4, so that's great. But for me, the big, most interesting stuff from the Microsoft conference was the smaller games, the ID and Xbox games, which they tend to show like 30 of them in the space of a minute. And you just sort of have to scrub back later and try to work out what they are. But that lineup is very, very interesting. And Microsoft also said that all the ID Xbox games are going to come to anyone who has Games Pass, which I think makes that a pretty attractive service. But in terms of big, first party or exclusive games, it was pretty light this year.
I do like the fact, and I've seen a lot coming out of E3 around the independent developer scene, and I know that's something that you've written about yourself as well. What are the standout titles there that you think people should be getting engaged by if you're leaving aside the AAA stuff?
Yeah, sure. So at the Microsoft, they have a big showcase afterwards where you can go, the journalists can go and see the games they sort of announced. So there was a bunch of indies there, and I saw Creature in the Well, which is it's beautiful. It looks like a comic book, but it's like a dungeon crawling Zelda game, but instead of fighting, it's like pinball mechanics. So you've got a sword
I'm
and
intrigued.
you've got a like a pipe, and so all these balls are shooting around. Like the enemies will shoot balls at you, and so you can stop them with your sword, and you can hit them with your pipe, and they bounce around. You need to hit bumpers to earn points, and yeah, it's ridiculous, but it's just one of those mashups you would never think about. And then when you see it, you go, wow, like this is so much fun. There's another one called Spiritfarer, which is an adorable game. It's basically a village sim where you're building up the town, you're talking to the townsfolk. All the townsfolk are these really precious, um, they're like animals, but they're not. They're like people animals. But the point of the game is that eventually each one that you've developed a relationship with dies, and it's your job to sort of see them off to the next world. And so it's like
Okay, that went in a direction I did not see coming.
it gets. I know.
This is a death sim.
As I said it, I realized how that sounded. But yeah, it's basically about facing the death of your friends in a really positive way, which is such an interesting theme. But it seems like it does it really well.
Wow. Okay. Again, I'm intrigued, but for very, very different reasons.
Yeah.
Um, it actually brings to mind something I was going to ask you in terms of streaming, because a lot of what we've seen, certainly out of Stadia, but even with Microsoft, has been this idea of, right, we'll have these AAA games, you'll have them first day. I think Stadia is working on a rotating set of games where Microsoft's kind of drawing from a larger catalog. It strikes me that it's an environment in which an independent developer might struggle a bit to stand out. Is that a fair impression?
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really stood out to me at this E3 is that there's a divide happening where there used to be a divide between AAA games and indie games. Now there's sort of AAA games, and then there's this sort of new batch of like premium indie games. So like indie games that have been picked up by, EA or Ubisoft and become sort of quasi indie because they have publishers, but they're still being worked on by these small independent teams, or things that get picked up into, you know, Microsoft's ID at Xbox program or a similar sort of subscription thing. So those are like premium indie experiences. And then there's this massive gulf, where sort of mid-tier games used to go but don't really exist anymore. And then at the other end, there's like true indie games, like the kind of stuff I saw at the Indiecade booth. Indiecade is kind of like the Sundance Film Festival, but for games. And once you're inducted into it, they sort of tour you around so people can play them. So those guys over there, I think, would really struggle in this sort of future of subscriptions that we're seeing because they're not aligned with publishers or platform holders. How are you going to get their games if you're just subscribing and getting what Microsoft or EA or Ubisoft feeds to you? So there is something to worry about there. But I think as long as there's a desire for, new experiences and unusual experiences, the platform holders will just have to find a way to give it to you.
So are the Indiecade ones the ones who are combining weird pinball games and death sims and pattern three matching games? What's going on over there games wise?
I suppose once you have the cute animal village death sim at the premium stage, it's kind of hard to imagine what you get at the very indie side of things. But a couple of the ones that I played include Manifold Garden is what it's called, and this one's been in development for a long time, and I still have trouble wrapping my head around what it is, even though I've played it. Essentially, you're in these impossible architectural forms that go on forever. So if you jump off the edge of it, you'll fall forever, and the architecture will just keep repeating. But the way it works is that you can switch gravity for yourself into any of the six directions so that you can walk on the walls and walk on the roof and sort of walk all around. And you're basically just trying to figure out how to progress through these bizarre things. So that's something that is going to be very tough to explain, obviously, and hard to see in a trailer either. You really have to play it to even know what it is.
Sounds like one of MC Escher's worst nightmares in action. And again, though, I'm intrigued. It's something I might kind of chase down. Um, Nintendo, of course, just to completely jump tracks, Nintendo were also there with a direct, largely showing off, though, a lot of stuff that we have seen before, just in more detail.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo, I think, has avoided a lot of the troubles that we talked about with Microsoft and Sony and others because they have they've sort of splintered themselves off onto a totally different schedule. And their Switch console is already what in its third year or approaching its third year, something like that. It's been going for a while. It's going to go for a while yet. So they're sort of in the middle when Microsoft is sort of on the precipice. So you're right. There was a lot of stuff there that we'd seen before, but I think Nintendo kind of gets the benefit of having actual gameplay to show and to get people excited. The Zelda Link's Awakening remake is absolutely gorgeous. They've got new Pokemon. They've got Luigi's Mansion, which was kind of flying under the radar for me, but now that I've played it, I've been reminded how good Luigi's Mansion is, and it seems like a really solid entry. And then obviously they're getting the benefit of Square Enix's massive pile of remakes and remasters that they're doing, plus a lot of indie stuff. And I think the Switch is just becoming a really nice platform where you have a big first party thing just about every month, and then a lot of these smaller things to fill in the gaps. Of course, they do have the problem, like you mentioned, that they've already announced their big first party things from here until about January, so there wasn't a whole lot new there. But in terms of platforms, it's probably the most exciting one at the show.
Yeah, they seem to also come to that maturity point where they've sold enough to actually get some of the other bigger games there. I mean, Witcher 3, for example, is now going to hit the Switch. And you've got to think, well, that's not a new game, obviously, but it's a big title for them to have. And obviously one that could have been on the Switch some time ago, but it took them hitting that critical mass of people owning Switches for publishers to get on board with. I think we can probably look forward to a larger catalog of some of those kinds of titles jumping to the Switch as well.
Yeah, and that's something that's really worked in the Switch's favor, I think, is that um, often when there's a new platform, people will port all the games to it. But in the case of the Xbox One and the PS4, I didn't do that a whole lot because I just played the games. I still have the old consoles. I can play them again if I want to. With the Switch, I'll buy stuff again all the time because it adds that value of being able to play it on the go. I'm going to play The Witcher 3 on Switch, even though it's like at 540p handheld. It's a much degraded graphical experience, but playing it on the go is such a different experience that it's worth it to me. And I wonder if we're going to see a similar thing with Stadia and xCloud, where we find that we want to revisit these other games or that we find value in different games because we can play them anywhere. And I wonder how much of Switch's value is going to be watered down a little bit if these other platforms really can deliver a streaming experience.
There's some content in Witcher 3 which I would feel a little bit awkward playing on a bus or a train or in a public place where there might be kids, but maybe that's just me. I do know exactly what you mean. I've bought a few things for my Switch that I already owned for that exact portability reason. Um, Nintendo, of course, though, did have an almost E3-esque tease right at the end because they're doing a Breath of the Wild sequel, which is not exactly a surprise, but it was lovely to see, or sort of see.
Yeah, I feel like this is the second year in a row where they've had one of those things where they've, showed a bit and then said is now in development, and you're sort of left saying, yeah, but like how far in development is it? I suppose the benefit with Breath of the Wild is that they already have the engine, they already have a lot of the assets. They had to make that spooky skeleton Ganon zombie asset for the trailer, but apart from that, they probably had all their art ready to go. So I'm really hoping they can turn it around in a year. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I'm unashamedly a Nintendo fanboy, so I was very happy with the that part of the direct.
I'm going to go contrary on you here. I hope they take at least 2 more years to deliver it. But that's more because I figure if they do it in a year, great, I get more Zelda to play, and I'm not going to complain about that either. But that would indicate to me that they're using the Breath of the Wild assets in exactly the same way that they've used them already. And it's a great game, don't get me wrong, but they've already done DLC for it. And if they deliver another game that's like Breath of the Wild, but it's just like Breath of the Wild, it's not going to feel as adventurous to me as that. And of course, we're basing all of this off 30 seconds of teased footage, but that's just my educated guesswork there.
Yeah,
We'll
and
have to wait and see.
I mean, who
suppose.
knows? They could have had a team working on this since very soon after Breath of the Wild shipped. Even though they did have that DLC after, but yeah, you're right. It's more about the new experience than getting it out quicker. And we do have quite a lot of Zelda to hold us over. In the meantime, there's that Cadence of Hyrule, which is coming out this week, and then there's Link's Awakening, which is coming out in a couple of months. So yeah, I am happy to wait if it means we can get something meaty and new, and potentially with a big twist. It looks like you're going to be underground. Some people are potentially saying it looks like you're going to play as Princess Zelda, although I didn't really get that from the trailer. But yeah, hopefully it's something that takes the best parts of Breath of the Wild, but gives them to us in a different way.
And to flip completely from the absolutely brand new to the really, really old, because as you know, I'm a massive, massive retro gaming nerd. There've been a couple of key things announced at E3. Konami has a whole range of PC Engine minis coming out because everyone needs a mini console. And then you wrote about a thing called the Poly Mega, which sounds like it probably should be illegal in 7 states. Tell me about it.
Yeah, the Poly Mega is I was skeptical, to be honest, because I've been following it, but it hasn't been in Australia at all, so I haven't seen it until now. What it is it's a modular console. So you buy the base, and the base has a disk drive in it, and so you can put your old disk games in there. So it does PS1, um, Mega CD, TurboGrafx CD, and Saturn, which is very interesting because very few emulators do Saturn. Uh,
Saturn is tough, yeah.
yeah, so you put them in and then you play the game, and it does a lot of interesting things. It is software emulation, but with hardwired controls, so the latency actually isn't bad at all. Uh, it will play the game directly off the disc, but it'll cache it in the background, so the loading screen's actually a lot faster. I played some TurboGrafx CD games, which usually have painful loading screens, and were very very good.
Mm.
And additionally, once it's cached it for a while, you can just install the entire disk to the system and never have to use the disk again. And it does that with cartridges as well. So potentially, I'm getting ahead of myself. The cartridge stuff, you have to buy separately these modules that click into the top, and each module has a cartridge slot and a set of connector pins for your old controllers. So you can buy a Super Nintendo module, which will do your Super Nintendo and Super Famicom games, your original controllers, or you can get a Sega module that does Mega Drive, Genesis, and 32X, which is another unusual system. So basically, you get whichever one you want, or both, and then you can put your cartridges, you can put your discs, you can back it all up to the system. So if you've got friends who've got cartridges, you can just take them, pop them in, pop them out, and then you have that game on your hard drive, and you can play it whenever you want.
which probably means they'll never be able to sell it in Australia because Australian copyright law sadly does not work that way at all, even for stuff you own, which I think is unfortunate, but that's where it is. It sounds very similar to, I think it's the Game Freak has been out there for a while, just as a cartridge-based variant of the same idea.
Yeah, so
But
Hyperkin also makes the Retron 5, which I have, and they do ship that to Australia. The big difference there is that once you take your cartridge out, it dumps the dumps the ROM, sorry, and you can't use it again. You have to have the cartridge in the caddy for it to work. The CEO of PlayMagi, I believe it is, who I talked to about the Polymega, says they are shipping to Australia. I didn't press him on that because I didn't want him to go looking into the laws and find out that he couldn't do it. But he claims that he is. So we'll see. We'll see once it releases. It's a couple of $100 US for the base system, which is pretty good. It shapes up really competitively with other sort of clone emulation consoles. But yeah, a lot of retro stuff at E3 this year, which I'm all for.
have you had a chance to look at the Konami minis at all?
No, I'm going to Konami tomorrow. I don't know what I'm seeing though. I have a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that they're going to show me the new Contra game, and I'm going to ask politely if I could leave.
Well, just slip one of the PC Engine minis into your bag on your way out. Send it my way. They'll never know. They'll never know.
I will do that. Yeah.
I'm obviously all for retro stuff. We've also got the new Mega Drive Mini as opposed to the old terrible ones. Please tell me it's better.
It's better.
Please.
It's so good.
Yay!
So this one's being made by Sega, and the ports are being made by M2, which is such good news, and it's so much better than those at games clone consoles. There's a couple of caveats. The Mega Drive Mini that I used was a European version, and I believe it was running the European games, which means 50 hertz. And I assume that's going to be the one that we're getting.
And borders?
No, it was full screen. It looked nice, but so I don't know. I couldn't tell with my eyes what we were running at. It looked smooth. It looked fast. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was some sort of trickery there. So to be confirmed. But it did look nice. It played nice. The collection of games is really good. My big problem is that it comes with a 3-button pad instead of a 6-button pad, which I mean is what the system launched with. But some of the games are things like Street Fighter, which is just outrageous that I would play that with a 3-button pad. But
I'm having flashbacks to how that worked, and I think you used the mode button on the controller, and it was terrible.
Yeah, because I remember, I think I played Mortal Kombat like that as well, where you had to hold start, you had to hold start, and that like was a modifier for the buttons, and it's just not a workable way to do it.
Oh, yeah, that's a pretty awful idea. Any other retro goodness that would warm my heart doing that on the show floor or being talked about?
Yeah, so I went to the Hyperkin booth as well and had a tour of all their new toys. Some interesting things. They had a product that I actually can't believe they're selling, which is a blaster that works with so Duck Hunt, the old NES game, doesn't work on HD TVs just because of the way the technology works. But
because it's not a CRT panel and you don't get that reflection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they've made it's a zapper and it's a adapter that goes between the game and the console that will make it work, but it literally only works for Duck Hunt. They've made a specific software. It's basically modifying the ROM on Duck Hunt to make it work differently, and then you've got a special gun. And I said, "Does it work on other games?" And he said, "No, we'd have to make a whole different one for other games." And I said, "Okay."
Wow. I mean, I like Duck Hunt, but I don't know I like it that much.
And then they had also a project to make a clone system for the Nintendo 64, and I couldn't get any details out of them about how that's even possible. They have a mock-up which looks very pretty, and the idea is that you put your original 64 cartridges in, you plug it into a HD TV, and then you play your 64. But if anyone has ever tried any solution to get a 64 running on a HD TV, you know that is fraught. It would have to be a full-on, 64 emulator, and they have to find a way to interface with that cartridge. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but if they can do it, I'll be first in line to get one.
Well, folks, that's just about it for another fine episode of Vertical Hold. So what do you think of the E3 Expo? Are there games that excited you? Do you think we are in an interstitial year, and are you keen to jump onto the world of streaming gaming? Let us know via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Tim for joining me for the show.
No worries, thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. As Adam always says, we're on a big push this year to reach more people. So a big thanks to all the listeners who've given us a shout out on social media. And remember, it really helps if you can jump onto your podcasting platform of choice and leave us a review to help spread the good word.
Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by NetComm, taking Australian technology to the global market.